All right, well, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday for this week. Let's see, it's February 6th today. And as per normal, we're going to go through what are the solar news highlights for the week in the news, and then some of the webinars, upcoming webinars or events that are out there. And then we focus in on a specific topic for a little bit of a discussion here. And this discussion this week is going to be about solar recycling of solar panels, some of the issues involved there. So, all right. So in the news, global investment of solar panel or in the transition away from fossil fuels has hit a record. It increased about 17% in 2023. Now global investments around $1.8 trillion in this transition. Of all of the different components of this, the major one is electric vehicle investment. That's about $634 billion. Other sectors that received quite a lot of investments were renewable energy, upgrading of the power grids, storage, battery storage, energy storage, clean industry, and clean shipping. Now, of all of the nations that are investing in this transition, China, once again, far and away, the lead investor in this transition, accounting for about 38% of the investment in this transition. US in second place with 17% of the global investment. And the next, rounding out the top five, Germany, 5.5%, UK about 4%, and France about 3%. Now, even though this is a lot of investment and it's been growing very quickly, I guess all of these numbers are from Bloomberg. Bloomberg estimates that 3 times that amount of investment is required to meet the net zero carbon emission goals by 2050. So they're estimating we're needing, as a globe, to invest about $4.8 trillion each year in this transition. Okay, power purchase agreement prices rose in the fourth quarter of 2023 by 4%. What this means is the wholesale cost of renewable electricity increased about 4%. So utilities buying power from independent operators of solar farms or wind farms, solar prices were up about 3%, wind prices up about 5%. This wasn't even across the country. For example, solar prices went down in Texas, but they went up by 15% in California. Well, for wind prices, it was exactly the opposite. Cost of wind went down in California, but went up in Texas. So in looking to see why this was all happening, of course, economists, I always think of Harry Truman saying he wanted one-arm economists because they always say on the one hand. And my dad always said that if you lined up all the economists in a row, they'd still be pointing in different directions. So anyway, they're saying they're blaming interest rates, increased interest rates, interconnection delays, increased demand for these products. For the upside, they're blaming, or they're citing, lower solar panel costs. For the downside, my impression in reading through all of this is nobody really knows why. It's just doing that. There are 4 senators who have put together a bipartisan appeal to the Biden administration to dramatically increase tariffs on solar products imported from China. These folks included John Ossoff from Georgia, Democrat; Sherrod Brown from Ohio, a Democrat; Marco Rubio, a Republican from Florida; and Raphael Warnock, another Democrat from Georgia. And they put together this appeal to Biden, basically saying they want increased tariffs on panels, chips, or cells and wafers in the solar industry. They're citing a new study that shows that the cost of production of Chinese panels and materials, because of heavy subsidies by the Chinese government, dropped an additional 15% in 2023. So it's now down from 26 cents a watt production cost to 15 cents a watt production cost for Chinese product. Compare this with the United States, where the cost is 40 cents for these same products. They're saying that, of course, Chinese products 60% less than American products because of these heavy subsidies. We've seen a 10% tax credit through the Inflation Reduction Act to support domestic manufacturing. But they're saying, okay, look, 60% less, 10% credit. No way is that going to cover it. We need heavier penalties on these in order to spur domestic production. Now, they're also warning that China is on pace by 2026 to essentially be able to meet the entire world demand for solar products. They're investing so heavily in this. So this is something that has to happen fairly quickly. Duke Energy just got permission from the North Carolina Utilities Commission to perform a study. It's a program they're calling Power Pair program. And what they're going to be doing is providing cash payments to residential customers, up to $9,000 for 6,000 customers to install solar and batteries in their homes. And then they're going to divide these into two groups. One group's going to simply be testing time of use pricing structure. How does solar impact that? So the utility just wants to see as they move their utility billing structure. The other group is they're wanting to take these batteries that are installed and take control of them and create virtual utility so that they could draw on these batteries during periods of peak energy demand. This is something we're moving to anyway. Now they're going to begin to enroll people in this program. They're anticipating the pilot will last about 10 years. To my way of thinking, this is real baby steps in a direction that we're going to be moving very quickly. The idea of a 10-year pilot project. By the end of that 10 years, virtual utilities are going to be a thing. So they're going to still be testing a concept that's probably a market dominant idea. And ADT Solar just announced, ADT announced that they're closing ADT Solar, getting out of the residential solar business altogether. Now, this has not been a good project for ADT. They acquired SunPro Solar in 2021 for a whopping $825 million. They bought this installation company and they rebranded it as ADT Solar. It was ranked 34th in total kilowatts installed nationwide, but struggled quite a lot. In fact, in 2023, they saw revenues decline about 68% over revenues in 2022. So in November of 2023, they announced that they were closing 22 of 38 branches to focus on the remaining 16 branches, which accounted for about 70% of all of their sales. And it's funny, when I read the press announcements at the time, we're committed to this, we're moving forward, we're really going to regain our national status and all that. And then, of course, a few months later, they just announced, no, you know what, we're out of here. So it's probably another example of how difficult it is to compete in the solar installation business. And that is the news of the week. Does anybody have anything that crossed their desk that they want to add to this? I'll give you that real quick opportunity here. And again, feel free to jump in at any point. The announcements for the week. There is on today, this afternoon, 2 p.m., there's a webinar on the proper way to deal with grid outages under the NERC standard. This is more for utilities. NERC standing for National Energy, gosh, I should know that, Regulatory Commission. Yeah. All right. And then tomorrow, 10 a.m., renewable energy market predictions for 2024. This is from Wood Mackenzie. On the 13th at 2 p.m., all these times are Eastern, three-dimensional design for ground-mounted systems, how to deal with the contours of the land. Normally in these large systems, you've got to go in and make flatten the area, make it very smooth. What a lot of these utilities scale systems now are saying, you know what, that's a lot of work. Let's just see how we can make these things follow the contour of the land, even tracking systems. Then on the 15th, selling solar using artificial intelligence. So that should be interesting. We're going to see more of that in everything, artificial intelligence. On the 15th at 7 p.m. from Solar United Neighbors, there's helping nonprofits go solar. This is a big deal right now because, of course, the Inflation Reduction Act allows nonprofit organizations to recap the tax credits as rebates. In the past, because they didn't pay federal income tax, they didn't benefit from the tax incentives of these programs. Now they can. On February 20th, cost reduction tips for solar companies. So that's another webinar there, and one about veterans, recruiting and retaining veterans on the 20th. On March 18th through the 21st in Raleigh, North Carolina, there's a NABCEP conference coming up if you're interested in attending that. And then, of course, our courses on solarpvtraining.com are available both online, and there's some face-to-face classes coming up. So check those out if you wish. And those were the announcements from the solar industry that came across my desk this week. Once again, I'll give you an opportunity if you know of something coming up, if you want to add to that. And
I just wanted to throw out a question. My church received a grant to install solar panels. It's a relatively small grant, won't do everything we want to do. But is there any sense from the group that this 30% tax credit or credit for nonprofit organizations like churches will go away if the administration changes in January?
No. Boy, that's a crystal ball thing. I can give you my opinion, and if someone else wants to jump in, I would be skeptical that it would. You know, this is a talking point for certain political parties, but the reality is raising taxes is always difficult, and that's what it would be to do away with that. And also, it's kind of subsidizing a very important segment of corporate America. And whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, you're pretty much there to do the bidding of corporate America. And so I think I would be surprised. It's not outside the realm of possibility. I think it's fair to say if the Democrats retain power, it's not going away. That's for sure. But if the Republicans come in, possible, but I think unlikely. I mean, that's kind of my uninformed guess. Anybody else have an opinion on that or read anything? I mean, we all have opinions on it, but read anything useful? No. Yeah, and that 30% is automatic. So when you file your taxes, I'm not sure if there's a specific form for the nonprofits or if it's just the 990. It's a 990 nonprofits file, isn't it? I think so. Anyway, when you file those tax returns, you should receive a rebate back. It's only for the out-of-pocket expenses. So if you have volunteers who are doing some of the installation or something, you can't get 30% on that volunteer value. It's only what was spent. So, but if you hire an installer, if you pay an installing firm, then you'll get 30% of whatever the labor costs were. Right.
Great, thank you.
Sure. All right, so let's jump into the recycling issue. And I guess the reason I thought this was important, well, one thing came up in my own personal life on this, but also I've kind of dismissed the issue of recycling when this comes up, basically saying this is something off in the future and we'll have figured it out by then. That's kind of been my response. Yeah, okay, solar is a thing and it's going to increasingly be a thing, but the options of recycling are going to be there, and we're really talking about 20 years in the future as these panels start to age out, maybe 15 years. That's a lifetime in this technology. But then looking at some of the nearer term issues of disposing of solar panels, I see that it really is a problem short term. I don't think it's a problem long term still, but it is certainly a problem short term. And as we see, the amount of material is just going to grow and grow and grow. And it was interesting because in researching for this, I did run across some studies, one of them by Harvard, that were projecting that were contrary to what a lot of the industry information is there. Because the industry information pretty much goes, okay, you've just started installing solar. They've got a 30-year lifespan. So in 30 years, we're going to have to deal with the disposal of these materials. How are we going to do that? And we can pretty much look at linearly how much was installed this year, and 30 years from now, that's what the problem's going to be. Well, Harvard came in and said, no, that's not necessarily the problem, because there are economic incentives to replace the panels early, especially as you start to see the costs of these systems coming down, the government incentive programs increasing, as we've seen with the Inflation Reduction Act, some of the degrading of the production. So we see that naturally occurring 0.5%. Some will even argue 1% a year, but so over time, these things do produce less and less. And then some of it's just going to be simple aesthetics. The newer panels look sleeker, better. They're flat black instead of those clunky, cell images that you see on homes. It's sort of like, why does somebody remodel a kitchen when they don't need to? The tile's still good, the counters are still good, but I want a different look to it. So they're then projecting out, saying that if people do start to replace this, even just using simple economic factors, that you might see as many as 50 times the amount of replacement happening in the early years as what would be predicted, just based on how quickly they're going to wear out. In this particular graph, the red line is early replacement, and then the other lines there, the green one is if there's no failure, and then the blue one is just wearing out, under normal circumstances. The same amount of panels are going to have to be replaced. Just are they going to be replaced earlier or later? So that's a concern there. So what's in these panels, right? What are the issues there? Because again, as with almost everything in renewable energy and maybe everything in our society today, there's a lot of disinformation and misinformation out there. I've seen a lot of information about all the hazardous waste that's in solar panels and all of the toxins, and most of that is just nonsense. But there are some trace elements in some panels, like cadmium in the cadmium telluride thin film panels. But for the most part, a typical solar panel here is really primarily aluminum and glass. That really makes up about 80% of the typical solar panel is just flat out straight glass and flat out straight aluminum. These are both very, very easy to recycle, easy to replace. With a typical crystalline solar panel, the remaining material is silicon, and silicon is worth a fair amount, and silver. So silver is typically the wires that you see on the front. Those are laminated on or injected like an inkjet printer, made of silver, pure silver. In fact, I understand, and I'm just quoting from memory here, but I think about 20% now of all of the silver used in industrial purposes in the United States is used for solar panels. So a fair amount of silver. Then, of course, there's going to be, some copper for the copper wiring, or that wire might be aluminum. So these are not exotic metals or anything of that nature that may cause problems. So how are these things typically recycled? Well, if it does go to a recycling center, then I found this quote in a study from MIT. They said most of these recycling centers just pop off the aluminum frame and then grind up all of the glass, silicon, and other metals that are contained in that. And they create a mixture that's called a glass cullet. And this glass cullet is then sold to be mixed in as filler material in other building materials or industrial applications. But that the cullet itself doesn't have a lot of residual value. They're claiming around $3 per panel of value there for the recycler. But if they could separate out the silicon and the silver, those two components make up about 60% of the cost of that. So that's the cost of putting those things in. It's relatively expensive. But the question is, separating it out, does that warrant the cost of doing so? So that's what's currently happening. Now, there is a couple of solar panels manufacturers who have begun to do a cradle to grave or cradle to cradle process. The one that gets the most attention is First Solar. That's located here in Ohio where I am. And they do a lot of marketing. I pulled this off their website. First Solar is utility scale thin film panels, largest manufacturer in the country for sure. And what they do is when they sell a panel to an end user, and these are usually utility scale systems, they will accept these things back and recycle them. They're claiming 90% of all of the panels they've sold have been recycled. So, and then they put in here a comparative with automobiles, around 75% get recycled. I don't see that second one there, information technology, I think, televisions and the like, 45%, and solar panels, 90%. But that's just their solar panels. And they will only accept their solar panels. They will not accept anybody else's. So that's one option that's out there. Then in 2016, CEA, the Solar Energy Industries Association, they started putting together a partnership of manufacturers and recycling centers saying, well, okay, we want to address this problem. How are we going to build up this network of folks to deal with it? And I pulled this map off their website there, and they're showing where the states are that have a partner. But the more I research this particular program, the more it feels like window dressing. It doesn't really seem to be any teeth in it. There's a lot of people saying, yeah, it's a problem and we'd like to address it, but it's really only a handful of recycling centers scattered widely across the country that are kind of pledging to deal with it in the future. So I don't see it as a big thing at the moment. Hopefully it will grow into that. Then another recycling effort that's gotten a lot of attention recently is Solar Cycle. And Solar Cycle talks about their program where they're primarily focusing on large systems, of course, because they generate the most trash. So they've got construction breakage. Then they can go in under their operation and maintenance. This would be if there's a large hailstorm, for instance, comes through Texas. There's suddenly a lot of cleanup, a lot of hazardous, a lot of waste that has to be brought out of there. So can we recycle it? And then another interesting concept is taking some of these things that are damaged, but not damaged beyond use, and repurposing them, going in almost the goodwill of solar panels. Let's take them, let's fix them, and let's resell them. So, that's something to consider, and we'll see how that plays out, because it's really coming into play here locally. And I'll share one of the things we're working on a little bit here in just a second. Well, I'll share it right now. I've been working with some folks who are dealing with large utility scale installations. And these installations have tens of thousands of solar panels that are being put in. And occasionally, one is damaged or two are damaged, or a forklift runs into a pallet of them and some of the frames are bent, or somebody drives over the MC4 connectors and crushes them, or glass break or crack or whatever. For whatever reason, out of these tens of thousands of solar panels, you get hundreds. That are damaged in some way. And typically they just get thrown into a pile and then they have to be disposed of. Well, many of them can be easily repaired. For instance, if it's just a damaged MC4 connector or a wire for some reason gets pulled out, something like that, you can fix that pretty easily. Some of them are just scratch and dent. There's a dent in the frame, could be fixed, could be ignored. Maybe scratch on the panel. Maybe it's just laziness where a pallet gets damaged. So let's just throw the whole pallet into the scrap pile. And if you really pulled that pallet apart, if there are 26 panels in the pallet, 3 of them are damaged beyond repair and the other ones are, perfectly fine. So that's where a lot of these things are coming from. So then you say, all right, why don't we take those panels that have substantial value and repurpose them, fix them if they need to be fixed, or just sell them as scratch and dent and get them back out there in the market. So we were looking at the cost of recycling, because as part of that thing, you say, okay, we'll take them all from you and we'll use the ones we like and we'll recycle the rest of them. When you start looking at the market prices on this thing, this was an ad from a recycler where they say the average market price is about $25 per panel. Now, this kind of surprised me off the beat, right off, because I thought, all right, I'm going to recycle these panels. They have value. Somebody's going to be happy to get them, and yeah, I might have to deliver them to them just like I do with my local recycling, but I certainly don't have to pay them to take these things. Well, surprise, surprise, you do. And typically to the tune of like $25 a panel. These guys are saying, hey, we're only going to charge you, what is it, $16 a panel there for this. And when we got a quote on trying to dispose of about 570 panels or so, the best quote we were able to get on it was 14 and a half bucks per panel, plus about $3,000 in shipping to ship it off to North Carolina. So to get rid of 550 panels or so was going to cost about 10,000 bucks just to recycle them. So small wonder that only 10% of the panels nationwide end up being recycled, because throwing them away is such a better option under the current economics. Not better for the environment, but certainly financially better. You spend 500 bucks and get a dump truck or whatever, or trailer, and just dump them in the local landfill, versus paying $10,000 to pallet them up and ship them off and deal with all of that, just because you want to do the right thing. So clearly this is an issue, not 20 years in the future, 25 years in the future, because there's a significant amount of damage happening at these utility scale systems right now. So there's a fair amount of panels that are having to be dealt with there, not to mention natural disasters, hailstorms, whatever, that are going to come in, and we got to figure out how to get rid of those, as they occur. Just like any other natural disaster, you've got to deal with cleanup issue, which brings, I guess, another interesting thing I wanted to look at is what causes these panels to be scrapped. And from the statistics I found here, there were a couple that stand out. Of course, there's delamination, where the front part of it is pulling loose. Things are just coming apart. That's usually a manufacturer's defect. And you can usually return those. Transport damage, that's big. Yeah, that happens a lot. And that looks like about 5% of the total damages. Frame is loose, frames issues. But the connector one I thought was interesting. Junction boxes, cables, about 10% of these, about 19%. Those are easily fixed. easily repaired. So that feels like those things should be salvaged rather than scrapped. So just an interesting market. I was talking to a local nonprofit about that could be a way of fundraising, gathering these panels in, repurposing them, and then selling them out. Obviously, issues there with warranty. How do you deal with that? You'd probably have to just sell them as unwarranted panels, which is going to decrease the cost or the price that you can get for them for sure. Another issue that hadn't occurred to me till I started looking through this is a lot of these states consider this stuff hazardous waste. Again, I think this stems from misinformation about these solar panels. The states that do not, for sure, do not consider them hazardous waste is California, Connecticut, Florida, Georgia, Hawaii, New Mexico, Nevada, North Carolina, Ohio, Oregon, and Texas. So in those states, this is just considered regular construction waste, or even I think it was in California and Hawaii, it's just considered general waste. So very few regulations there. Now, some of the states, the rest of them typically consider it hazardous waste, but you can get exemptions from considering it as such. I'm sure that just involves paperwork. But the states where there are no exemptions, where it is hazardous waste, Arizona, Colorado, Delaware, Maine, Maryland, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Puerto Rico, which I just made a state, and Wisconsin. So those are states where you're going to have to deal with this waste as if it's hazardous waste. I'm not sure what the regulations are on that, but I'm sure it adds to the cost of disposing of these panels. And I don't think most homeowners are familiar or realize that at the time of disposal, they're going to have to deal with that. And then I ran across an interesting regulation or legislation that just passed in Washington State, Senate Bill 5939. And this is going into effect July 1st, 2025. So next year, any panels that have been purchased after July 1st, 2017, the manufacturer is responsible for providing a way of disposing of that panel within the state of Washington. So whether either they have to take it back and recycle it, or they have to provide, as the law says, provide the public a convenient and environmentally sound way to recycle all modules. So this is a model that's used in Europe. Essentially, the manufacturer of the product is responsible for the recycling of that product, not the person who purchased it. I remember when we lived in France, it was interesting because the French government started fining McDonald's for every bit of McDonald's litter that they had to clean up along the highway. They would say, all right, we'll go out and pick it up, but you guys manufactured it. You guys made a profit off of it. So we're going to bill you our time for cleaning up this mess. And of course, McDonald's screamed and cried, but the French didn't care. And as a result, McDonald's produced products that had less packaging. So that's kind of interesting to see that it can be an effective solution, or a solution anyway. I don't know how effective. All right. And that is basically what I have to do, or what have to say on recycling. Anybody have any comments or questions or concerns they want to add to this? See if we can prompt some sort of discussion here on the wonderful world. Anybody run into issues of trying to dispose of solar panels for whatever reason, in whatever manner?
Yes, I've actually looked at it pretty extensively whenever I worked on a project where some panels were damaged by a fallen tree. And we did not actually come up with a resolution other than I am storing them until the outlook is better. I had some extra space. So.
Uh-huh. So
Uh,
yeah, you just
and-
hope you don't end up with thousands and thousands of them, huh?
right, yeah. And so but on other projects where we have upgraded systems, we simply, I was able to connect the person that was upgrading their system to secondhand buyers, um, that were happy to buy some panels at a discounted cost. They were like maybe 8 years old or something. So
Mhm. Well, I know, Taylor, you run an installation company. How often do you run into people who just say, you know what, these are getting kind of long in the tooth. I'd like to maybe get newer panels up there. Is that a thing like kitchen countertops? Like I want to go from granite to whatever.
I don't think it is going to be too much the upgrading. As at least as a portion of my business, we've been in operation a little over 3 years. Got about 26 projects behind us. We've done two situations where we have just simply upgraded panels. But yeah, it was really fairly easy to get them repurposed. Sold to somebody on the secondhand market. Um, and truly, the the purpose of them upgrading panels was the original installers have sort of undersold them on what they needed. Which then again, looking back 8 to 10 years, the cost of solar panels were considerably more. So I can justify maybe why they sized the system a little undersized. But and then also you have to consider oftentimes where as we move towards electrifying everything, people that have a 6-year-old system, as they further go towards using electric appliances, that obviously their needs are going to grow for their energy usage. So
Mhm. Okay, yeah, one of the issues that I was looking at with these reusing of utility scale panels, if you can repurpose them, is a concern I had was they're much bigger typically than the
Yep.
residential panels. So you're dealing with like 525 watt, 530 watt panels versus the typical home now that's in the 400 watt range, maybe 350. Um, and I was looking at, for instance, doing it with Enphase. You just say, well, that's just not going to work because it's too big a panel for the microinverters. But then I just saw this week Enphase announced they've got a new microinverter coming out that will go up to 540 watt panels. And that's their 8M or something like that, the IQ8.
right.
And that's great, and now we could take these panels and they'll work with Solar Edge, they'll work with Enphase. So maybe we can see taking some of these and moving them, for example, into the nonprofit center where you say, okay, let's get these utility scale people to donate these panels that are left over on a project or slightly damaged. And let's see if we can't start putting these on nonprofit institutions. They get a deal on the panels. The installers get a write-off at the utility scale, and we all still try and be as green as we possibly can be. So hopefully that'll
Well,
work.
I would suggest that those larger panels would lend themselves to using string inverters, like on a commercial rooftop or on a ground mount. Obviously, residential, we try to stick with the 60 to 66 cell format. When you're referring to the solar farm types, yeah, those are a much larger format. Would be much comfortable on either a ground mount or a commercial rooftop, which oftentimes doesn't use microinverter. But yeah, now Enphase is a great option. I personally prefer Enphase whenever we're referring to microinverters, but I see all the time, there's these companies that are launching these microinverters that are capable of processing, 1,500 to 2,500 watts. So you can, it's almost like, where do you draw the line between a microinverter? Whenever you start hooking 4 or 5 panels up to it, then is it a string inverter at that point? So,
Right. It seems like a mini string inverter.
but there are those options out there.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then yeah, so it's like we're arguing that a string inverter is not good, but yet we're going to try to sell you a microinverter that has four to six panels on it. So I always think that's kind of funny when they do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, also you have to think about I guess the degradation of, so it might be a 500-watt panel, but it might only be capable of, say 95% of what it was originally, at the STC rating when it was first made, so, or even less. It might be putting out 90% of its original nameplate. So
Sure. Yeah. If they're used, as opposed to if they're
yeah.
damaged during initial installation.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, another source that I've heard about for these panels is insurance claims. Like let's say you've got a big commercial installation on top of a roof and there's a fire. Many times, most of them have not been impacted, but the insurance company will just say, you know what, just take them all off and replace the whole unit. So that's something to consider as well, because that would be a good secondary market for solar panels because you just know they're fine. 10 of them out of 100 were damaged, but for whatever reason, the insurance adjuster just said, yeah, the whole array is a loss. So, yeah, and then I never even did get into when we talk about the energy transition, when you talk about batteries, lithium ion batteries for electric vehicles. That's a huge issue that's going to be coming up. Similarly to what we're dealing with solar panels here, where only about 5% of the EV batteries are currently recycled versus about 95% of lead acid batteries. So that's going to be something that we're going to have to deal with. And we're a bit hoisted on our own petard here because we're out there arguing that this is a green industry, that this is good for the environment. Well, we need to be consistent with ourselves all the way through this process about, it's very tempting to just say, you know what, haul them off to the dump, because problem solved. But it's not really a problem solved. It's a problem shifted to some other
Right.
problem. Yeah.
We need to be able to eat our own dog food, as they say. I think this figures. Yeah.
Okay. I've never heard that expression. Is that a West Virginia expression?
That might be.
Uh-huh. So you gotta.
But also now, Jay, I have to commend you. You've done an incredibly very good framing of this whole scenario. One thing I would add, I sat in on a webinar there a couple of months ago. I believe it was from Dow Chemical. They are trying to develop some chemicals or things that can encapsulate broken panels. So much like the panel that's in my background, if you guys can see that, that is a panel that was broken upon arrival. It was one of, I think, 33 on the pallet that was damaged. So obviously we kept the pallet, and my distributor is going to be replacing that panel on a following order. Shipping one panel at a time, they say it has about a 50% failure rate. So we are waiting actually for another order to get that replaced. Anyhow, I'm going to save that panel. I'm keeping it in a dry place with hopes that maybe one day I'll, when Dow develops a composition that is pretty well proven, I might try to use it on that panel and then be able to save it and repurpose it, sell it to somebody, like an off-grid client. Using one panel might be obviously a very small system, but it's a 400-watt panel. So
Yeah, we talked about, I know Tim Chavez is on the call here, and he had salvaged some panels that were hit by vehicles along the roadway. Anything that's along a road gets hit eventually. And we talked about making like a roadkill array at some point, which would be kind of fun, is to just do an experiment somewhere where we do a ground mounted system with just damaged panels and see over the long term what is the effect on production? You know, visually we might say, you know what, that's going to really impact the production. But maybe those micro cracks don't do as much as they might look like they would, you know. So I'm sure there's been no experimentation on that, you know, to just say, yeah, is it 50%? Is it 80%? You know, well, if it's 80%, then maybe that's better than just throwing them away. You know, we can get 80% production out of these, and the scale is just going to get bigger. So I guess, Taylor, when you receive damaged panels in a pallet or something like that, does your distributor just say go ahead and trash them, or does he say send them back, or what are they doing with those things?
Actually, there was no comment on that. They didn't say, you know, they didn't direct us on what to do with it, other than the fact that yes, we will replace that panel. The shipping carrier was actually tasked with the, you know, they were responsible for it. It was sort of funny at the shipment. I was very careful in unloading, or you know, as I am at any point when I'm operating equipment, I was very careful unloading, and the driver said, "Oh, no need to be careful. If only you saw what they did at the DC that I picked them up at." And I'm like, that's interesting. So then that prompted me to open up the carton, and yeah, found that panel had been jabbed by a fork.
And I guess I would warrant to the folks who are on the call who are maybe homeowners, where they get a delivery delivered to their place. Sometimes you're getting these things weeks, if not in maybe months, before you're going to do the installation. We always tell in class, make sure you open these things up and inspect them when they're received. Ideally, you can do that while the driver's there, but with a pallet of solar panels, they're not going to usually wait around while you're inspecting all the panels. But don't sit on them for 2 months and then open them up, you know, the day that you're going to install and find out half of them are damaged, because your distributor might not even accept them back if you've waited 90 days, you know, to let them know there's a problem. So inspect the things immediately. That's just, you know, sort of common sense, but I've run into that before where people haven't. So it's just easier to just unload
my
it in the garage.
My distributor instructs us to mark on the bill of lading. Currently, you know, everything looks good, pending further inspection.
Yeah.
And then I usually try to, within about a 2-hour window, I try to get everything fully inspected. That way I can, you know, say, hey, like the driver just left an hour or 2 ago, you know, and this is what I found.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And then of course,
I take pictures of everything, you know, whenever it's on the truck, once it's off the truck. So I've got pictures showing that, you know, if it is damaged, I can kind of prove that, hey, this mark on the cardboard was not here whenever, or you know, was here upon arrival.
Okay, doke. Let's see. Did anybody else have any comments they want to share here with the group?
I have a comment.
Yeah. Okay.
So this in this hour that we've been talking, so what would one do with their panels right now if someone's got, you know, a half dozen in the garage? I mean, what can you even sell them? I mean, you know, some of them are like some that I have are like 35 watt. They're a nice big panel too.
Yeah. Oh, nice and old then. You're saying, are these damaged, or you just, what do you do?
They're perfectly functional.
Yeah, well, of course, something like that, eBay or Facebook Marketplace is always an option for these little orphaned panels. But there is a secondary market, you know, for larger scale. I know, like Sun Power out of Florida? They do a lot of these things. I mean, for you with the little panels like that, they can be problematic, you know. Although I would sell them on eBay or Facebook Marketplace. I'll tell you.
We're talking about what, like, could you get 30 cents a watt?
I think, you know, it's interesting because I've been looking, I do those solar generators, you know, occasionally, and
Right.
those little panels, the 12 volters, if you've got like 100 watts or less, they actually go for $80, $90 a piece, you know, to buy them new to get a little 12-volt panel because they're not so easy to find. And so they might have some value there. Or you might sit on them for the rest of your life. But I would say make some solar generators and then sell it as part of the solar generator, you know. Then you can do those YouTube ads, you know, or is the zombie apocalypse coming and you don't have any food? Here's a solar generator. So all right. Any other comments?
Very,
Oh, go ahead. Somebody was commenting in.
oh, I just said very, very well said.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Well, let's see. Nonprofit take and redistribute. Yeah, I don't know if Goodwill or somebody like that would take that kind of thing, Tim. You might check with them.
Yeah, maybe Habitat for Humanity.
Yeah, they
Same.
might. They might. You know, there's always the odd little thing. Somebody who wants to do a chicken coop and just hook up a little DC system for a light. You know, a little panel like that has those very specific uses. I would say that the bigger issue, you know, from a national standpoint, is not the clutter in your garage, Tim, but it's more like for these guys who oftentimes like a distributor or an installer like Taylor, for example, you might decide to buy a pallet of panels because it's cheaper and you get 26 in a pallet or whatever it is, but you only needed 23 or 22 or whatever. And now you've got 4 panels that are sitting there and you do that 100 times. And now you've got 400 panels, but each of these panels are different than the last panel. So there's not like you can take all of these 100 panels and you're going to have a kaleidoscope of look to it. So these orphan panels, I was just thinking maybe it would be kind of fun to come up with a design, you know, patchwork quilt design for a ground mounted solar array or a rooftop mounted solar array. Because if you're using microinverters, of course, each panel operates separately, so you don't have to have uniformity. But maybe that's another thing to think of is how do we make these solar arrays something more than just a power source? You know, how do we make them into a statement of art or a statement of culture or whatever, you know, integrating design, more so aesthetic design into our solar arrays. So that's something to think about. I don't know. But it feels like that might be a solution. If people don't say everything's got to look uniform, everything's got to be square, everything's got to be perfect, then maybe that allows us an opportunity to use some of these orphan panels.
So Jay, I had a question about when you described the panels initially. My panels were installed in 2019, and as I recall, they were very light and did not appear to have any glass on the front of them.
Yeah.
Am I mistaken, or is the glass very thin?
Yeah, I wondered about that because I have seen some panels where clearly it's glass on the front, you know, and you can just tell that. And then other ones, I just feel like it's just got to be a polymer laminate that's on the front without any kind of sealant glass there. So I might be wrong, but I think they come in both flavors. You know, I imagine there are some that don't have glass that just have laminate. Or like your impression. I mean, when I do it, I bang on it with my fist and say there's just nothing there, but just a very thin layer of something with it feels like almost a lamination, you know, plastic laminate on top or something, and then a metal backing, you know, aluminum back. I don't know. Does somebody have more experience with these? Because I have seen panels. Well, one way you could test, Albert, is just throw a rock at it, and if it shatters, then you know it's glass.
Well, I have a follow-up question then too. I've seen a lot of controversy about this. I can access my panels. My roof's fairly low slope. At some point, should I be washing the panels?
Yeah, and yeah, we touched on this at a previous one. Before, the general wisdom was, yeah, rain's going to take care of it. Don't worry about it if you live in a wet environment. Now the discussion is really that's not the case, especially if you have nearby sources of pollution, like you're near a road where there's heavy emissions, or more so pollen from trees that's going to drift, oak trees or any of the pine trees. So yeah, it wouldn't be a bad idea if you can do so once a year to just get gentle dishwashing detergent. Use one of those extenders squeegee things like you would use from a trucker, cleaning the windshields of their big semi trucks. Make sure it's all plastic, that there's no metal on it that's going to scratch. And just use something like a Dawn dishwashing detergent or whatever, and just do a nice little once over. I know I switched out our panels and moved them at one point, and these are in the middle of a field, and I was just amazed how dirty they were, even though they look clean. So, and there are some companies that are coming up where I saw one in California where they're saying, we will take care of washing your panels in exchange for a percentage of the increased revenue from electricity. So obviously they're looking at doing that as for very large systems that are being tracked well. But I guess the bottom line is, if you can, yeah, you might see as much as a 10% improvement of production by just washing them once a year.
Albert, do you know this? What panels you have, the make and model? Did your installer leave you with that information?
I'm sure they did. I'd have to go back and look.
Okay.
I'll check and let you know.
Something that yeah, I mean, I'd be glad to help you figure out if yeah, we knew what they are. Something that I look for when buying panels, we do a lot of ground mounts. We do a tilt adjustable ground mount that we've been offering for the last 3 years, and have just really loved that product. And now that bifacials are more common, we've gone all bifacial on our ground mounts. Something that I am careful of is some bifacials have a non-glass back, so like a resin type backing, and some of them have a glass. Now, in my opinion, I always go with all glass, front and back, because I feel that the resin compositions will, we're talking about a 25-year product plus, 25-year plus. I feel like relying on a resin to not yellow and degrade is questionable. So I always make sure that we go with glass on glass.
Okay. So you're saying, Taylor, that not all panels have glass, but
not all bifacials have glass on the back.
Oh, okay. All right.
Now,
but on the front?
Now, of all commercially available solar panels from reputable companies that I know of over the last, several years, they always have glass on the front. Now, I don't know of any of them that, so I would beg to argue that, Albert's system probably has glass. If he got it from, I'm sure he got it. He used a reputable installation company. I would say that his panels have glass.
Okay. All right.
But-
Okay. Well, I'm going to have to cut off discussion here. We're right up against it, but I appreciate it. And thank you, Taylor, for chiming in. I appreciate that too. And we'll see everybody next Tuesday at noon. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.